In this video, we'll look at anonymous threads. What are anonymous threads? Let's say you have some task that you want to execute concurrently on a thread. Here, we are in the main method, so everything running for the main method will be running on the main thread. But if we have a task that we want to execute concurrently on a different thread, we have to first create that thread and give it some task to execute. Up till now, we've looked at two methods. Both those methods required us to create separate classes, and we created those classes here. One class extended the thread class, the other class implemented the runnable interface. But what if we do not want to create a separate class? We can easily create an anonymous class that can be used to start a thread and execute our task. We do not need to create a separate class in that case. So how do we create this anonymous class? Remember that this would require much less coding and is sometimes an easier route to go. Because let's say you have just one simple task that you want to do on a thread that you do not think you would repeat again and again in your program. In that case, there is no reason for us to create a separate class. An anonymous thread will do the job just fine. So let's see how we can create anonymous threads. Again, there are two ways. We can extend the thread class or we can implement the runnable interface. And we'll see both those methods. At first, extending the thread class. We start by creating a new thread, T3, and this is an instance of the thread class. But instead of ending the statement right here, we actually use a curly brace, and in this space, we will write our code. And whatever we write here will ultimately make this whole thing one statement for us. And so the anonymous class will end here. So what do we write inside our anonymous class? We'll start by implementing a run method. And so here we're basically overriding the run method of the thread class. We use the setName method to name our anonymous thread. Let's say after that we print out our thread's name by using the getName method. And then let's say we print integers 1 to 5 as well as the name of our anonymous thread. And let's say that's all we do in our run method. Let's say this is the task that we want to run concurrently using our anonymous thread alongside our main thread. So now that we have our thread object T3 and the thread object also knows what to do if it is started, we can now start our thread. And we just use the start method on our thread object. Once we do that, let's also print out the name of our main thread. And that's it. Let's now run the program and see what the result is. Great, so this is our result. What happened here? At first, the program created the thread object, and this thread object had the implementation of the run method in it. So it knew that if the thread object is started, what task to run in the thread. This whole thing is one statement. So when we run the program, this whole statement is executed at once. We then start our thread, and as soon as the thread starts, the run method is executed. It sets the name and then prints out that name. And that's the result we get here. Concurrently, the main thread is also running, and the very next statement of the main thread is printing something out, and that's the result we see here. Thread.currentThread.getName gets the main thread because we are running this statement in the main thread, and so you see that the name of the main thread is main. When this was printed out, the name of this thread was anonymous thread because we named it anonymous thread. The main thread has done its job, but the anonymous thread is still working. It prints out its name as well as the integers 1 through 5, one after the other, or rather 0 through 4, because we started from 0 and we're ending right before 5. And that's the result that you see here. Now, this part and this part were run by a thread concurrently with the main thread. The main thread printed this part out only, but the main thread did other things as well. It created the anonymous thread. It also started that anonymous thread. So this is how you can create an anonymous thread and give it some task to run concurrently. So if you look at this part, you'll see that we created a thread, but we did not have to create a separate class for it. And this also required us to write fewer lines of code. So this is how we can create an anonymous thread by extending the thread class. We can also create an anonymous thread by implementing the runnable interface. Let's look at that as well. At first, we create a runnable object R. Again, we do not end our statement here. Rather, we use our curly braces and we'll write the code for our run method here. And this will then become our whole statement. So whatever we write in here together will make this part one statement. This is giving us an error right now because we must implement the run method since that is the abstract method in the runnable interface. So let's implement the run method. We say public void run, and here we'll write the run method code. And let's say we just print 0 to 4 using our anonymous thread. We'll then create a new thread and we'll pass our runnable object to the constructor of that thread. And then we'll just start our thread. And let's print the name of the main thread again. So if we run the program here, this is the result that we'll get. This part is the result of executing our anonymous thread, and this part came from the main thread. What if we wanted to name our anonymous thread? What we can do is that we can create a thread object inside our run method and store the anonymous thread object's reference in this new object that we created. And then we can use the setName method to name our thread, and then we can just print it out. Before running the program, let's also print the name of our anonymous thread before each integer is printed out. And now let's run the program. So you see the same thing happened as before. We have the name of our anonymous thread printed first. We then have this statement printing the name of the main thread, and then concurrently our anonymous thread prints out the integers 0 through 4 while also printing out its own name. And we created this anonymous class by implementing the runnable interface. So now you know how to create anonymous threads by extending the thread class as well as implementing the runnable interface.